The telegram was 4 days old and smelled of coal smoke and bad news. But the man who delivered it was freshly dead at Elara Vance's feet. Elara, 30 years with the landscape's harshness etched into the corners of her eyes and the firm set of her mouth, didn't scream. She stepped back from the ranch house doorway, her boot heels silent on the worn pine planks, her hand drifting to the weight of the Colt Navy revolver she wore low on her hip, not for show, but for use. The messenger, a boy really, no more than 19, with a peach fuzz chin now smeared crimson, lay crumpled in her porch dust. The morning sun glinting cruelly off the brass buttons of his ill-fitting company jacket. The shot had come from the tree line, a sharp, spiteful crack that scattered the blackbirds in the rustling cottonwoods alongside Iron Creek. She hadn't even read the telegram yet. It lay on the floor where it had fallen from the boy's lifeless hand, a cream-colored rectangle against the dark earth. Her foreman, Josiah Holt, was already moving, a grizzled silhouette flowing with a predator's grace from the barn, a long rifle in his hands. He didn't speak, just melted against the corral fence, his eyes scanning the green, sun-dappled shadows of the trees. This wasn't the vast, empty desert of storybooks. This was Montana territory, a lush, valleyed land of dense pine, swift, cold rivers, and grass that could hide a wolf or a man with a rifle. Gone, Josiah called out after a long minute, his voice a graveled rumble. Took a horse. Headed north towards the pass. Elara knelt, her denim skirts pooling around her. She pried the telegram from the boy's stiffening fingers, ignoring the stark reality of him. The words were brutal in their simplicity. Mother deceased, stop provisions of will mandate your presence in Sterling City, stop settlement re Iron Creek. Holdings imperative, stop lawyer J. Pendleton, stop. Her mother. The woman who had sold a young Elara to a bitter rancher for a parcel of disputed land. The woman she hadn't seen in 15 years. Dead, and her death, it seemed, was a beacon for more violence. Josiah approached, looking down at the boy. Company rider from Sterling. Didn't even see it coming. He squinted at the tree line. Wasn't trying to hit you. Was macking a point. Don't come. Elara stood, folding the telegram into a tight square. The Iron Creek holdings. Her ranch, every hard-won acre of it, purchased with years of her sweat and strategic silence in a bad marriage ended by a lucky bout of pneumonia. It was legally, unquestionably hers. But her mother's will, that suggested otherwise, or someone wanted her to think it did. Bury him down by the creek, she said, her voice devoid of the tremor she felt inside. Mark it proper. Then get the men together. You're in charge till I get back. Josiah's weathered face tightened. You're going? That's a 2-week ride, Elara, and somebody just declared war on the messenger. They declared war on me, she corrected, her gray eyes like chips of flint. A war implies two sides fighting. This was a warning shot. I am to find out who's giving the orders, and I aim to make them regret it. She packed light. Bedroll, ammunition, dried meat, the Colt, and a Winchester rifle. She changed into a practical split skirt of brown canvas and a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt. Her one vanity was a single silver hairpin shaped like a heron. That had been her grandmother's. She didn't say goodbye to the men. Just gave Josiah a firm nod from the saddle of her sturdy Dunmar. Seraph. The ride to Sterling City was a journey through a changing west. She skirted the booming mining towns with their garish noise, kept to the high trails where the air was thin and clean. She crossed not deserts but vast, blooming meadows of lupin and paintbrush, forded icy rivers swollen with snowmelt, and navigated passes where the wind howled with a voice of its own. She was alone, but not lonely. The land was company enough, and its harsh beauty was a language she understood. A week into the journey, she found the camp. It was tucked in a hollow beneath a basalt cliff, a small fire gone cold. and beside it a man. He was lying on his side, his face pale beneath a dark stubble, a blood-soaked bandage around his upper thigh. A fine bay horse stood hobbled nearby, watching her with intelligent eyes. The man's hand rested on the butt of his own revolver. Alara halted Seraph, her Winchester already unsheathed and resting across her saddle. "You look like hell," she said, her voice cutting the quiet. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were a startling shade of green, clouded with pain but sharply aware. "Feel worse," he managed, his voice dry. "Wolf, not the four-legged kind. Two-legged with a knife." She saw it then, the slashed saddlebags, the emptied pockets. "A robbery. You're a long way from anywhere," she stated. "So are you," he countered, trying to push himself up and failing with a grimace. "Name's Rook, Matthias Rook, Alara Vance." His eyes flickered. "Iron Creek." Her finger tightened on the rifle's trigger. "What do you know of it?" "Enough to know a woman who runs it alone is either foolish or formidable." He gestured weakly to his leg. "I'm in no position to be a threat, Miss Vance. The threat already came and went. Took my money, my papers. Left me this." She dismounted, keeping the rifle trained on him. She moved with a quiet competence, examining the wound. It was deep and ugly, but clean. He'd cauterized it himself with a heated knife. The smell of burnt flesh still lingered. The act spoke of a formidable will. "Why were you headed to Sterling?" she asked, digging in her pack for her kit of yarrow powder and clean linen. He watched her, studying her face. "Looking for work. Heard there was." Instability. Where there's instability, there's usually a need for a man who can read a ledger and use a gun. A man of varied talents. She packed the wound, her hands firm and impersonal. He didn't flinch. "I was a surveyor. Then a lawman for a spell. Now I'm a man who might bleed out if you ride on." Alara finished the bandage and sat back on her heels. He was trouble. She knew it in her bones. But he knew something about Iron Creek, and he was observant. In the wilderness, a wounded man left behind was a dead man. And a dead man told no secrets. "You can ride double with me to the next settlement," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You try anything, I'll put the next bullet in your other leg and leave you for the real wolves." A faint, pained smile touched his lips. "Fair terms, Miss Vance. More than fair." As they rode, him behind her saddle, his body a line of tense heat against her back, she felt the first prickle of true danger. It wasn't just the unseen sniper or the dead messenger boy. It was this man, Matthias Rook, and the unsettling sense that his arrival in her path was no accident. The land had thrown them together, and the cruel inheritance waiting in Sterling City was drawing them both in, a whirlpool pulling them towards a truth written in blood and legal ink. Sterling City wasn't a town. It was an argument between mud and ambition. Spring rains had turned its single main street into a chocolate-colored river, churned by wagon wheels and the hooves of nervous horses. The buildings' raw timber and false fronts seemed to huddle together for shame, their grandeur promised by painted signs but undone by the clinging grime. It smelled of wet pine, horse manure, and the distant metallic tang from the stamp mills pounding ore in the hills. Alara left Rook at a grim boarding house, run by a woman with a face like a clenched fist, paying for a week's lodging and a Sawbones visit with silver coin. "Heel," she'd ordered, her tone leaving no room for debate. "I'll find you if I need you." His green eyes had held hers. "You will." The law office of J. Pendleton was above the saddlery, reached by an exterior staircase that groaned under her weight. The office itself was a surprise, orderly, smelling of beeswax and good paper, with a wall of leather-bound books. Pendleton was a small, precise man in his 50s, with spectacles and fingers stained faintly with ink. He did not look like a villain, Miss Vance," he said, rising. "Your promptness is noted. Please sit. May I offer condolences on the loss of your mother?" "You may," Ilara said, not taking the offered chair. She remained standing, a pillar of worn leather and resolve in the tidy room. "But let's move to the matter of the will. And the man you sent who was killed on my porch." Pendleton paled. "Killed? Young Peter? Oh, dear God." His shock seemed genuine. He sank into his own chair. I had heard he never returned to the telegraph office. This is dreadful. Who else knew you were contacting me?" Her voice was a low whip crack. "Why, the terms of the will were read to the principal beneficiary, of course, your half-brother Silas Gantry." The name was a physical blow. Silas. Her mother's son from the marriage she'd made after discarding Ilara and her father. A boy she'd only seen once, a squalling infant in a fine lace blanket. "He is here in Sterling," Pendleton continued, recovering slightly. "He has taken rooms at the Grand Hotel. He is eager to settle the estate. What are the terms?" Pendleton opened a mahogany box on his desk and produced a document. "In essence, Miss Vance, your mother's entire estate, which consists primarily of her one-third ownership in the Sterling Silver Mining Consortium, is bequeathed to Mr. Gantry. However," he adjusted his spectacles, "there is a codicil, a later edition. It states that her original, unfulfilled claim to the mineral rights underlying the Iron Creek Valley rights she believed were stolen from her first marriage are to be investigated and, if legally viable, pursued. She names you as the inheritor of that specific claim should it be validated." Ilara's mind raced. Mineral rights. Not her grass, her water, her cattle. What lay beneath? The ore-rich mountains that bordered her land. A fortune in silver far greater than any cattle empire. Her mother's final act was not kindness, but a grenade rolled into her life. And who validates this claim? A federal land agent was dispatched. He is overdue. Pendleton's voice dropped. "There are powerful interests in the consortium, Ms. Vance. They have long considered the Iron Creek Valley a future site of expansion. Your mother's claim, and now yours, is a significant complication." She left Pendleton's office with the cold certainty that she was walking into a spider's web. The Grand Hotel was the only three-story structure in town, its whitewash struggling against the mud. She asked for Silas Gantry at the desk. The man who descended the staircase 10 minutes later was not what she expected. He was near her age, handsome in a soft, polished way, dressed in a tailored suit already out of place. He had their mother's fair hair and weak chin, but his eyes were a calculating blue. "Sister," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes, "a tragic circumstance brings us together at last." "We share a mother, not a history," Ilara said flatly. "I understand you've inherited her shares." "I have. And you've inherited a lawsuit by the sound of it." He gestured to a plush chair in the lobby. "The consortium's board is anxious. This old claim. It's a nuisance. I'm prepared to make you a generous offer for your interest. A buy-out. You can return to your cows a wealthy woman. It's not for sale." His smile tightened. "You should consider it. This is a rough town for outsiders, especially those standing in the way of progress. That dead boy on your land. A terrible accident, I'm sure. More accidents happen around here every day." The threat, now in the open, hung between them. Before she could answer, the hotel doors swung open and Matthias Rook limped in, leaning heavily on a crutch he'd acquired, his face still pale but his eyes alert. He ignored Silas, looking directly at ELAR Ms. Vance. "There you are. We need to talk." His gaze slid to Silas, privately. Silas's eyes narrowed, taking in Rook's rough appearance. "And who is this?" A concerned citizen, Rook said, his voice deceptively mild. One who just spent an hour with the local undertaker. He's had a busy week. A federal land agent named Corwin was brought in 3 days ago with a bullet in his back. Found in a gully north of town. The air left the room. Silas's composure cracked for a single, revealing instant a flash of panic. Not surprise. Alara kept her eyes on her half-brother. A land agent. How inconvenient for the consortium. I know nothing about that, Silas blustered. The mining camps are full of desperados. The undertaker said his papers were gone, Rook continued, his green eyes locked on Silas, but not his boots. Strange thing to steal. Unless you were looking for something specific sewn into the leather. Silas took a step back. This is slander. Pendleton. This is your doing, stirring up old ghosts. He turned and hurried back up the stairs. Elara looked at Rook. You shouldn't be walking. And you shouldn't be talking to snakes without a stick, he replied. I found something else. In my saddlebag, the one the Wolf didn't slash. A map of the Iron Creek Valley with surveyor's marks. It wasn't mine. She understood. He was the federal agent, or had been, and someone had tried very hard to stop him from reaching her. They'll come for you now, she said quietly. They know you're here. Rook's pained smile returned. Then it's a good thing I found you first. We need to get out of Sterling, tonight. Your brother's buyout offer just expired. Now they'll just try to bury us. As dusk stained the muddy streets purple, Elara knew the legal battle was over. The war for Iron Creek had truly begun. And her unlikely ally, a wounded man with a surveyor's map and a lawman's past, was the only key to unlocking the cruel truth her mother had left beneath the soil. They left Sterling City under a quilt of low, drizzling clouds, the lights of the town swallowed quickly by the dense, dripping forest of lodgepole pine. Rook rode stiffly, his jaw clenched against the pane with every jarring step of his horse. Elara led them on a route known only to trappers and outlaws, a winding path along rock shelves and through icy creek beds that would hide their trail. After several hours of silent, grueling travel, she reined in at the mouth of a narrow canyon. A waterfall, swollen with spring melt, thundered down a black rock face to their left, filling the air with a cool ozone mist. In here, she said, her voice barely audible over the roar. Behind the curtain of water was a shallow cave, a dry pocket of stone and silence. It was an old place she'd found as a girl, her secret sanctuary from a miserable home. They led the horses into the damp gloom and built a small, shielded fire. The flickering light painted Rook's face in stark relief, highlighting the pain and the sharp intelligence. Talk, Mr. Rook, or Agent Rook, Elara said, handing him a tin cup of coffee. Who are you, and what's really on that map? He took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. They were cold. Matthias Rook, former Deputy U.S. Marshal, lately contracted as a land agent for the Interior Department. I was sent to investigate the mineral claim your mother filed, based on old Spanish land grants from her first husband's family. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. The claim is legitimate, Elara, shockingly so. The vein they call the Sterling Lode? It doesn't peter out at consortium borders. It branches. The mother lode, the real fortune, runs right under the heart of your valley, under your house, under your creek. The words settled in the cave like stones. The cruel inheritance wasn't a phantom. It was a mountain of silver waiting to be torn from the earth she loved. Silas and the consortium knew. She stated, they suspected. My predecessor, Agent Corwin, confirmed it. He sent a preliminary report. Then he turned up dead. I was sent to finish the job and file the final validation. He dug inside his shirt and produced a oilskin pouch, from which he extracted a folded map and a few pages of closely written notes. This is what they killed for: proof. With this, the federal government recognizes your claim. The consortium's operations would be illegal. They'd owe you royalties on every ounce they've dug up for the past 2 years. Elara studied the maps, the precise lines and annotations. A different kind of power, cold and legal, settled beside the familiar weight of her Colt. So we ride to the federal circuit judge. File the claim. Rook shook his head. Judge Wortham is in Helena, a month's ride. And Silas won't wait. He has to destroy this evidence and you along with it. The man who shot your messenger, who knifed me, who killed Corwin. He's not just some hired gun. His name is Cutter. Amos Cutter. He's the consortium's problem solver. He's here, in these woods right now. Silas's panic at the hotel will have sent him running. As if summoned by his name, a sound echoed faintly over the waterfall's rumble, the distant, sharp crack of a snapping branch. Not an animal. They exchanged a glance and doused the fire in unison, plunging the cave into absolute blackness. They waited in the dark, the only sound the water and the beat of their own hearts. Minutes stretched. Then a shadow moved against the lighter darkness of the waterfall's veil. A man's silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered, holding a rifle, peered into the cave. He couldn't see them, but he was listening. Elara's hand found her Colt. Rook's fingers closed around her wrist, stopping her. He shook his head, a motion she felt more than saw. Shooting in the confined space would be deafening, disorienting. They'd reveal themselves. Cutter took a step inside, his boots silent on the whetstone. He was methodical, a predator used to the dark. He moved past their hobbled horses, who shifted nervously. Rook moved. It was a sudden, violent uncoiling, a flash of motion propelled by sheer will over pain. He didn't go for a gun. He launched himself at Cutter's legs, taking the bigger man down in a crash of limbs and a grunt of surprise. The rifle skittered across the stone. Elara was on them in an instant. Cutter had already drawn a long skinning knife, its edge glinting. Rook had his forearm locked against Cutter's wrist, muscles corded, holding the blade inches from his throat. The two men were a tableau of straining violence in the near dark. Elara didn't hesitate. She reversed her Colt, gripped the barrel, and brought the heavy iron butt down on the side of Amos Cutter's head with a sickening, definitive thud. He went limp. For a long moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Rook rolled off the unconscious man, clutching his wounded leg, a fresh stain of blood seeping through his bandages. "Thanks," he gasped. "Don't mention it," Elara said, her voice steady. She knelt, quickly disarming Cutter and using his own belt to bind his hands. She found letters in his coat pocket, orders from Silas, written in careful, damning language, and a bank draft for a large sum, half paid, half promised upon resolution. "We have him," she said, holding up the papers. "We have Silas." Rook leaned against the cave wall, his breathing easing. "Cutter's horse will be close. We take him, we take this evidence, and we don't go to Helena." A hard, determined light came into his eyes. "We go to Fort Benton. Colonel Mercer is there with 2 companies of cavalry. He's an old friend. He hates mining conglomerates that flout federal law. He'll provide escort to a judge and hold Silas and the consortium board for conspiracy to commit murder." It was a better plan. Military protection. A swift, legal hammer-dot as they hauled the groaning Cutter to his feet and prepared to move out into the pre-dawn gray. Elara looked at Rook in the faint light. He was a stranger, wounded, entangled in her life by violence and geology. Yet, in this dark cave, he had thrown himself on a knife for a claim that wasn't even his. Why? She asked simply, gesturing to the struggle that had just ended. Rook met her gaze. "Corwin was my friend. And the law. It's the only fence between civilization and this. He nodded at Cutter. Your mother's claim, your land? It's the law. It's right. That's supposed to mean something. He paused. And you? You didn't leave me to die in that hollow. It wasn't sentiment. It was a statement of fact, a balance sheet of debts owed and owed. It was a language Alara understood perfectly. They rode out as the first birds began to call, 3 people bound by violence and silver, heading for a fort that promised justice, if they could survive the long ride through a country owned by their enemies. The Missouri River at Fort Benton was a wide, brown, powerful thing, churning with the memory of mountains. The fort itself was a bastion of weathered stockades and orderly whitewashed buildings, the flag snapping smartly in the constant wind. It felt like a different world from the damp green violence of the woods. Colonel Mercer, a man with a cavalryman's ramrod spine and eyes the color of gunmetal, received them in his spare office. He read Silas's letters to Cutter, examined Rook's credentials and the land maps, and listened to their story with a face that grew stonier by the minute. When Alara placed the blood-stained telegram from the dead boy on his desk, he finally spoke. This is an abomination, he said, his voice quiet with fury. Murdering federal agents, intimidating landholders. This consortium thinks it's a law unto itself. He stood. Agent Rook, Miss Vance, you'll have your escort. A full troop to Sterling City. We will collect Mr. Silas Gantry and the members of the board. We will proceed to Judge Hathaway in Virginia City. He's closer than Helena and has a stomach for this kind of fight. The journey back to Sterling was a somber parade of blue uniforms and determined purpose. Cutter, sullen and handcuffed in an army wagon, was a potent symbol. The sight of cavalry riding into Sterling, with Alara Vance and a limping Matthias Rook at the head, sent a visible tremor through the town. Men watched from boardwalks, their conversations dying. Silas was arrested at the Grand Hotel, sputtering indignantly until Colonel Mercer read the charges aloud on the veranda for all to hear. The board members, 3 wealthy, complacent men from back east, were gathered from their offices and homes. The legal machinery, once engaged with military force, moved with breathtaking speed. The trial in Virginia City was a sensation. Rook testified with cool precision about the survey, Corwin's murder, and the attempt on his own life. Alara testified about the dead messenger, the threats, and the history of the land. The letters to Cutter were entered into evidence. The consortium's lawyers, sleek and expensive, could not weather the storm of fact and federal resolve. The verdicts came down like axe blows. Silas Gantry and the consortium board were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and interference with federal land agents. They were sentenced to long terms in the territorial prison. Amos Cutter, for the murders of Agent Corwin and the messenger boy Peter, was sentenced to hang. The Sterling Silver Mining Consortium was dissolved, its assets seized. The federal judge then validated, in a separate civil proceeding, the mineral rights claim of Alara Vance, nee Gantry, to the Iron Creek lode. A month later, Alara stood on the porch of her ranch house, watching the evening sun gild the tall grass of her valley. The deed to the land and the mineral rights were locked in her strongbox. The silver beneath the soil was now legally, unassailably hers. She could be the richest woman in the territory. Matthias Rook walked up from the creek, his limp almost gone. He leaned against the porch post, following her gaze. The army had offered him a permanent posting. The judge had suggested he could make a fortune as a consultant to mine owners. What will you do with it? He asked, not specifying whether he meant the money or the power. Alara was silent for a long time. She thought of the dead boy in her dust, of Corwin in his gully, of the way the thunder of stamp mills drowned out the sound of birds. She thought of her mother, whose final gift was not love, but a weapon. "The vein stays where it is," she said, her voice firm. "I'll lease grazing rights to the small holders the consortium pushed out. I'll use some of the money from the seized assets to build a proper school down in the valley. A doctor's office." She turned to look at him, her gray eyes clear. "This land gives life. It'll not be turned into a poisoned hole for the sake of silver." Rook nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. "The colonel said the offer stands. You'd make a formidable federal marshal, you know. There's a lot of country that needs a good fence." She smiled then, a real one that softened the flint in her eyes. "I've got a lot of country right here that needs tending first." He looked out at the land, at the creek like a silver thread in the twilight, at the strong ranch she'd built with her own hands. "It's a good place to tend," he said quietly. "It is," she agreed. The cruel inheritance had been tested in blood and law. It had tried to make her a target, a victim, a greedy baron. Instead, it had shown her the strength of her own will, brought her an ally in a wounded stranger, and given her the power to protect the only thing she ever truly wanted, the living, breathing land itself. The future was no longer a threat to be weathered, but a valley to be shaped, with the iron resolve of creek water and the slow, sure growth of deep-rooted grass.